And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if I decide on mac and cheese for dinner, will I have saved enough money for that plane ticket to Toronto? And with Ben Affleck and J-Lo recently running over a sign at the Starbucks drive-thru, how many lattes is he about to pay for? And now, the podcast host who always treads carefully at the drive-thru, especially when he's there for those delicious chicken sandwiches, Pete Dominic!
It's like you've got a camera following my life around, knowing, in fact, that I order chicken sandwiches. Did I tell anybody that? I probably have. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. I've got Dr. Jason Johnson and Jarrett Yates Sexton. Two great conversations. I think you are going to love both of them. I'm very happy to have you joining me on this podcast, listening along as we travel through our lives together on this journey, supporting each other, befriending each other, like at tonight's Hangout. It's Thursday, so we will have a happy hour hangout for any paid subscribers. Sign up now, standupwithpete.com. Join us tonight at 8 East. I'm looking to take some time off next week. I don't know if I will succeed because I've got a broken brain about it all, but I do plan to post content, even though I'm not going to be, quote, working, and I might even be taping some interviews. See, I can't even commit to doing it within this conversation, but I'm going to try to have some special stuff for you next week, but just bear with me as I try to navigate it all. Val and the girls are headed out to California to see her family, and I'm going to try to head into the woods and see mine. Nature is my family, and hook up with some good friends and make some new ones. So you'll just, I guess, have to wait till Monday when you turn on the show and find out what's there. But today, I've got the news for you. Plenty to talk to, headlines and more. It's time for The Last 24. The CDC extended the mask mandate on planes and public transit for another 2 weeks. The mask mandate now set to expire on May 3rd. The CDC citing the spread of Omicron variant BA2 or B2, which now makes up more than 85% of new coronavirus cases in its decision to extend the requirement. New research showing that as many as 200,000 U.S. children have lost a parent to COVID, and often their grandparents left to take them in and help them heal while coping with their own grief. Terrible news there on COVID-related news, but there it is. The president said yesterday he's going to send an additional $800 million worth of military and security aid to Ukraine. A telephone call with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Biden said the U.S. will supply more of the weapon systems it's already provided and new capabilities tailored to the wider assault, including apparently some attack helicopters. Is that what I read? New Zealand reopened its border to Australian citizens and permanent residents arriving from anywhere in the world, as well as up to 5,000 international students. And let me have Lindsey Brown of ABC World News Tonight tell you about one of the biggest stories in America today.
In Grand Rapids, Michigan tonight, there is growing outrage over graphic body cam video released that shows the deadly police shooting of a black man following a traffic stop. It appears to show an officer on top of the driver during a struggle. The officer then pulls out his gun and shoots.
I've been reading about this one all day, and it looks pretty bad. It looks really bad, in fact. And hundreds of protesters marched to the Grand Rapids Police Department headquarters. Here's the president of the Grand Rapids, Michigan NAACP. His name is Clay Jackson.
He had the discretion how he wanted to pursue that young man. As a trained officer of the law over a simple traffic infraction. And some will say, but he probably had warrants out. Well, you had a witness that was there on site. You had the vehicle. If it was that serious to this community, if he was such a threat to this community, I'm sure local law enforcement agents would have probably apprehended him later that day or within the week.
You're probably going to hear this name a lot. The victim's name in this deadly shooting is Patrick Loyola, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about his case and what's going on in Grand Rapids and across the country. By the way, speaking of cops and racism and black people. And I mean, I guess I'm trying to find a category to file this story under that relates to that one. But I read this story today about a sheriff in Arkansas who has come under fire for assuming that black people were behind a deadly triple shooting in his county. Also then told a local news outlet when asked that he does in fact use racial slurs. He contended that using the N-word is something, quote, everybody does. Is Prairie County Sheriff Rick Hickman is his actual name. Old Dick Hickman has come under fire, and because it ended up being, by the way, all white people, both the victims and the assailant in this case. He also told the outlet, I don't use the N-word a lot, but occasionally I might have said it. A black man from the community there named Jamel Brown was asked to comment on the sheriff's comments. I read this and I wanted to share it. And the young black man said he would pray for his county's top law enforcement officer, and find out more at KARK in Arkansas. And the New York City suspect who apparently shot 10 people with a pistol and used smoke grenades in the subway, they caught him. At this point, you probably know more about that case than I do, because I don't know. I haven't been paying that much attention to it. I'm going to be talking with guests, including Chris Brown from the Brady Organization about gun violence in America. I was planning to talk about the ghost gun issue with her, but I'll talk about this. But I just feel like the media coverage of it has been too much. I don't know. I don't do people. There's shootings all the time, all over the country that get far less coverage or even mentions. And I don't know if this was because it's in New York and that's where all the media lives and they were directly affected by it, or if it's the nature of the shooting being on the New York City subway, which rarely happens, something like that, that there was video of it that they could run. I don't know, but I personally haven't been paying that much attention. I'm glad they caught the guy, but he's clearly, I think it's fair to say, mentally ill from what I've read, and what he's admitted about his own medical history, apparently. But my only reaction to it was that we should always remind each other that mentally ill people are always far more dangerous to themselves, more of a danger to themselves than they are to anyone else. And that's why we should make it harder for everybody to get their hands on a pistol and a bunch of bullets. That's all I have to say about that. Look forward to talking with you about that at the Hangout. If you join me tonight, I always love throwing around the latest news from the week and also criticizing media and their coverage of it. All right, and now let's go to from racism over to some sexism, the old kind of sexism. This is an Irish soccer football coach, and he says that women players have a harder time reacting after goals get scored on them because they get so emotional.
In the women's game, you'll have noticed, I'm sure you will, if you go through the patterns, when a team concedes a goal, they concede a second one within a very short period of time. Right through the whole spectrum of the women's game, because girls and women are more emotional than men, so they take a goal gun in, they don't take that very well.
I mean, do you think he knew that what he was saying was going to outrage people? Do you think he thinks that that's outrageous? Does anybody buy into that listening right now that wants to make the argument? I wish we would consider anger an emotion. I wish we would consider that an emotion. And I'm not sure how the emotion of female feels when a goal gets scored on them versus a male. I'm guessing it's the exact same type of cycle. I don't know. Maybe less anger or something. I don't know. Yeah, are they sadder when they... I'm not even sure what to say about that, but I wanted to share it. Instead of saying anything, let's go back to ABC News, who has an interesting report about the first female coach in Major League Baseball, which I think proves, well, it's just the opposite of what we heard from that asshole.
History was made at the Giants-Padres game last night. Giants assistant coach Alyssa Nakken became the first woman to coach on field in MLB history. Nakken came in to coach first base for the Giants in the third inning after Antoine Richardson was ejected. She was greeted warmly from the crowd as she got on the field, and the Padres first baseman Eric Hosmer shook her hand. 31-year-old Talmadge is already heading to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
All right, well, that's a nice story. And I like this, too. This is from President Obama, who sat down exclusively with the Today Show's Al Roker, talk about his new Netflix documentary series titled Our Great National Parks, which is a call to action to preserve the parks for generations to come. Here's the former president.
The generation of our kids are more mindful of how we haven't always taken care of the planet. And with climate change affecting everything, they are demanding action. Nature is more resilient than we think if we are intentional about it.
All right, here's a little bit more. He's walking and talking with Al Roker and listing some of the benefits of vitamin N, as we call it.
Does it feel being in this national park?
Well, you know what? Anytime we get out of the city and we're among trees and woods and critters, I feel better.
The former president serving as both executive producer and narrator.
There's nowhere else you'll see a hippo in the Atlantic Ocean.
The series not just a feast for the eyes, but a lesson on the importance of protecting the parks and their wild residents.
I'm hoping that we're going to learn something not just about how to maintain national parks, but why it's so important to deal with issues like climate change that threaten the entire planet.
All right. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm looking forward to watching that series on Netflix. And now let's head over to the White House, where yesterday the bus filled with migrants sent from Texas and the Texas governor in a PR stunt to try to get attention to the immigration issue. That bus made it to D.C., and this horrific, dehumanizing political stunt seems like it might backfire, as there seems to be no end to the Republican xenophobic depravity, Max Burns at the Daily Beast writes. And here is Jen Psaki at the White House taking a question from the Fox News reporter about it.
The first bus of migrants arrived in D.C. today. Texas Governor Greg Abbott making good on his promise to send migrants to the president's doorstep. I think you previously called it a publicity stunt. Is that still the view of the White House? Can you give us any reaction to this busload of migrants arriving here in D.C.?
Well, these are all migrants who have been processed by CBP and are free to travel, so it's nice the state of Texas is helping them get to their final destination as they await in their outcome of their immigration proceedings, and they're all in immigration proceedings.
So about 30 people from Colombia, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua traveled to the U.S. Capitol as part of Greg Abbott's stupid new plan in response to the end of this Title 42 rule, and they basically said, we're thankful for all the help that has been given to us. We didn't have the money to get here otherwise, so we're really thankful for the ride, basically. Another bus apparently is already en route. According to John Ensler, who's the president and CEO of Catholic Charities and a volunteer with the migrants, most of the bus's passengers had family in the area and left immediately after arriving. He said other volunteers with his organization went to Union Station to assist the migrants after they heard of the bus arriving, giving them pamphlets to the charity. I mean, this is probably something we're going to see a lot more of. And one of the migrants seeking refuge here in the United States said, from here on, I think things will be better. I have hope that things will be better and that my children will have a better quality of life, because that's why they're coming, of course. Yeah, I really don't get it. You think the people in D.C. were phased at all about those folks getting off a bus? Do you think that concerned them at all? It didn't. They were like, oh, good, new people to come and fill job openings, maybe. That's really what the issue, I think, more than anything else is right now. All right, we got some commentary from Dr. Fauci yesterday at the NIH. I want to share that with you.
There are people right now in the overwhelming majority of the locations in the country that are in green zones are getting back to normal life. They're not wearing masks indoor. The schools are back. So there is a degree of normality there. So in that respect, you wouldn't call it a crisis, but you don't want to forget about it, because we know what variants can do. Remember, we got fooled with Delta. Remember, we got fooled with Omicron. So we've always got to be alert to the fact that we're dealing with a challenge that is a moving target for us.
All right, Dr. Fauci yesterday with a COVID update. And now let's head over to the U.S. Senate, where Chris Murphy of Connecticut was warning about the dangers of all these anti-trans bills, which apparently in 2022, over 150 anti-transgender bills had been introduced in state legislatures. Banning trans kids from youth sports, banning trans kids and adults from bathrooms and locker rooms, banning or restricting gender-affirming Medicare for trans patients. Here is Chris Murphy warning about what these laws will mean.
Criminalizing parents of transgender children is just around the corner in some states. In Congress, Trump's allies spend more time talking about transgender kids than they spend time talking about health care or taxes or education. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, perhaps Trump's best ally in the House, had a sign outside her office calling the experience of trans people a fiction just to bully her hallway neighbor, Representative Marie Newman, who has a transgender daughter. And in the Supreme Court hearings here last month, at least one senator used their time on the national stage to suggest that the entire idea of being transgender is a left-wing hoax. All across America, Republicans, not all Republicans, but the Trump wing of the Republican Party, has declared a war against transgender kids.
And by the way, should mention that the guy who brought us the fear all around critical race theory being taught in public schools and manufactured that whole thing is now coming after educators and American public schools, saying that they're groomers, they're sexual predators. Yesterday, he tweeted, American public schools have become hunting grounds for sexual predators. According to the federal government research, school employees harass, manipulate, and abuse up to 5 million kids, often using, quote, grooming techniques to cultivate their victims. A scandal. And then he wrote all about it. Obviously, every school has issues. I mean, there's always problems and they deal with it. And this is something that he is trying to paint all of public education with, and to some extent, all of educators with. There's just no doubt about it in my mind. Randy Weigarten, who is the fearless president of the American Federation of Teachers, an advocate, obviously, for teachers around the country, she tweeted, when I tweeted that Betsy DeVos and Chris Rufo want to end public schools, lots of people who say they are conservatives tweeted at me that they are in agreement with that goal. This is the strategy behind Rufo and DeVos's attacks. Sow distrust, privatize the schools. Hashtag just saying. They want to destroy public education, the public education system, which has all kind of flaws and all kind of problems, and they've wanted to make it a private system, but a public education system which has made America as strong in so many ways as it is. I could go on and on about this one. Let me stop. But yeah, just get ready for all the teachers are groomers, because you're going to hear that at your BOE meeting. I'm sure I will too. Saying it now. All right, well, that's all the audio I've got for you, but a lot more headlines coming your way. It's time for the news dump, and here's yet another original jingle brought to you by our friend Pete Coe. This jingle is based on a story about a Florida woman who was arrested for domestic battery after she allegedly scratched her girlfriend in the face with the couple's cat. Okay? The couple got in a fight, and one lady used the cat to scratch the other lady's face. Here's Pete Coe's rendition.
Florida woman's angry cat, girlfriend's in a huff. The cat caused many injuries for today's news dump.
Yeah, that's not right. That is just not right, ladies or lady. Okay, thank you, Pete. And let's get to some of those headlines. Now, how about this one? California has proposed to triple electric vehicle sales by 2026. 35% of all new cars sold in California will be electric by 2026 under a new proposal from the State Air Resources Board. The governor, Gavin Newsom, has set a target of fully phasing out new fossil fuel-powered cars, the source of about 25% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, by 2035. What about that? What if that happens? It would be remarkable change in the atmosphere, the air in all of California, wouldn't it? In a related story, a Japanese e-vehicle battery company is going to build a Kentucky plant. The Kentucky governor says a Japanese battery technology company will build a $2 billion factory in Kentucky, creating 2,000 jobs. So that seems pretty cool, too. So those are two good headlines. I guess this is a good headline as well. There's a Dutch bank named ABN AMRO, and they've apologized for historic links to the slave trade in the 18th and 19th centuries, including the involvement of one of the bank's predecessor institutions in, quote, day-to-day business of plantations. Made the official apology on Wednesday. The bank, the latest institution, apologized for historic ties to slavery following the Bank of England in 2020 and the municipality of Amsterdam last year amid a global Black Lives Matter reckoning over the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Or at least that's how ABC News wrote about it. This is a huge story yesterday. Amazon said Wednesday that for the first time in its company's history, it's going to charge sellers a 5% fuel and inflation charge. The e-commerce giant said the new fee will begin April 28th. It's being imposed because inflation has worsened significantly in recent months. Uber and Lyft have recently begun tacking on temporary fuel surcharges to rides, and airlines have also been raising airfares. A new study says researchers say they've linked silica dust directly to severe black lung disease. Findings in a study that looks pretty good because NPR is reporting on, well, I shouldn't say that's why it looks pretty good, but I usually don't report these studies on the news dump. But NPR and Frontline found thousands of recent cases of the severe disease in just 5 Appalachian states, among them minors in their 30s who experience a rapid progression to advanced lung disease. And you can read more about it at NPR. 2 Sikh men were assaulted and turbans were ripped off in New York City. 2 Sikh men were attacked Tuesday in Richmond Hill section of Queens. New York police are investigating it as a hate crime. The kind of thing happens all the time and just doesn't get that reported. I saw it and wanted to mention it. How about this? 75% of Americans think the worst of the war in Ukraine is yet to come. Quinnipiac University national poll finds also that more than 8 in 10 think Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. So that was an interesting poll I wanted to mention. And the United Nations now warning that 350,000 children in Somalia could die due to starvation unless the world rallies to provide food aid to the impoverished African nation that is in the grips of the 4th straight year of a crippling drought made worse by climate change. I've got to get someone on to talk about that. I'm writing it down as we speak. And a tragic, if it wasn't kind of hilarious, story coming out of Maryland where a 49-year-old man was found dead in his home. He died of a snake bite, and it's because he had 124 snakes in his house. Nobody seemed to be aware that he was harboring snakes inside his home, but he had them all. You name it, he had them all. And apparently that was the end of him. It's a sad, tragic death and way to end today's news dump. I've got to get Ava back on here to do good news segments for us. But now it's time to get to my very special guest joining me today. Coming up, Jared Yates Sexton. Before that, a great conversation with Dr. Jason Johnson. I do want to mention I have a sponsor this week. It's Indeed.com. So if you go to Indeed.com/standup, they are going to help you find a super talented, qualified person to work at your firm. So check that out, and you get a $75 credit to bump your post up, and you get to find the best, most qualified candidates. So check out Indeed.com/standup. I'm very happy to have them sponsoring the show this week. And now let's get to those guests, shall we? First, I've got Dr. Jason Johnson. He has become one of my closest friends over the last 2 years. We talk quite a bit on the phone, on the air, and we just really shoot the shit. And it goes where it goes. I always have a pretty good agenda with Jason, but I just press record with him, with Wajahat Ali, with Mara Quint, with obviously Christian and Ophira. The conversation is just always so great with guys and men and women like these. And Jason and I talked a little bit about his childhood here at the top. It was interesting to to find out where he grew up and how he grew up. And so that's where we start with Dr. Jason Johnson. You can find him online, drjasonjohnson.com. You can listen to his podcast on Slate. It's called A Word. Follow him on Twitter at drjasonjohnson. He, of course, is a professor at University, an MSNBC contributor and anchor. You've seen him filling in for Joy Reid and Ari Melber and so many more. All right, let me just allow it to pick up where we were, wherever I kind of just pressed record. We were talking about growing up in the suburbs and skateboarding, and that's one of the things Jason didn't actually do growing up. Here we go.
Wooden ramps, but we didn't have any skate parks. I mean, remember, I grew up in like the D.C. suburbs. Nobody had skate parks.
I know, but we made those ramps. We built a half pipe. We skated street style in urban, like in Syracuse, the cement and all that.
I have no idea what skating street style is.
It's not anything that's not like ramps and big airs. It's like ollieing up on a curb and grinding off of a step, going down an actual railing in front of the courthouse and then getting arrested because skating is a crime.
Okay, so I remember skating as a crime t-shirts.
Yeah, that was my first experience with injustice, personally.
I know Tony Hawk. I know Ryan Sheckles.
Yeah.
I actually know skaters. Like, I know a couple of skaters. That's 100% more names than your average person could name. Because I know somebody beyond Tony Hawk. And I remember the Tony Hawk video game.
Christian Hozoe? Nothing?
I do not know who that is.
All right.
I remember Skate or Die shirts.
Yep.
Those are
you
very,
must
very
remember
real.
the video game. The first skateboarding game was pretty good. What was that called? Was it Tony Hawk? I don't know. Yeah, Nintendo.
Tony Hawk had like 12 of them, but it was it was something skate. It was something.
It might have been Skate or Die.
Game. Yeah, maybe Skate or Die was, but it was Skate or Die was also like a slogan. It was like Vote or Die with Diddy. It was like one of those things. It's like, oh, the skating's so real. Look, in the burbs where I lived in, nobody was getting arrested for a damn thing. So it's like none of the kids in my neighborhood. I had a neighbor whose father was a DEA agent. The guy used to get rolled off to in his driveway every other weekend, pissy drunk, and he still didn't get arrested. No one in my neighborhood got arrested for anything.
Oh, wow. That's interesting to explore. We've never explored your neighborhood, your childhood neighborhood.
It's a fascinating neighborhood.
What was
my memories compared to my mom's.
What was the ethnic makeup of your neighborhood?
Let's see. White, and extra white.
You were the only black family on the cul-de-sac?
Yeah. I was the only black family in my entire neighborhood until, let's see here. Well, okay.
When the Johnsons moved in and then everything changed.
Oh, no. Dude, haven't I told you the story about how my family moved in? Didn't we tell you the story?
I've heard many, and I'm not sure if
this is the one. This is my neighborhood. This is the 90s in Northern Virginia, right? This is Centerville, Virginia. First off, there were no black families in my neighborhood, the cul-de-sac behind us, the street around us, until I think my freshman year of high school, where a woman named Ty moved in. Her family moved in. Her parents weren't particularly friendly. Like, I don't remember ever getting to know them. But she and I went to high school together. She ended up she got an Olympic gold medal. Like, she played basketball at Duke and then was part of the women's team that won a gold medal. And now I think she's like a mechanical engineer or something else like that. Like, that was the only other black person in my neighborhood. So it's the only black people who were there were always apparently more exceptional than our white neighborhood.
Well, I'm always, except the way that you guys, what did you do with your lawn? You people is the phrase that I wanted to, the racist phrase I wanted to use. You people and your lawn care or uncare.
So we had a lawn. We were at the end of a pipe stem on a cul-de-sac. And if you know what those terms are, then you grew up in a neighborhood like mine.
Yeah.
And so mowing my lawn was hellish because it was this huge dip before you went into a creek. There's actually a creek right next to my house.
That's cool.
I tell people my life was Dawson's Creek growing up.
Did you play in the creek, I hope?
So it would dry out during certain times a year. But when we first moved there, before the other houses were there, there was actually water running through the creek. And me and my dog would go down there and play. And I had this leather whip. Please explain. I'm giving context. It was this leather whip that was like an Indiana Jones whip that I would use to swing across trees. in the woods. Yeah, man.
Mom, new black kid just moved in. He seems cool. He has a whip. Do you think it's for us?
Right. Are they trying to tell us something? Are they trying to tell us?
Oh, wow. So you did the lawn mowing? That was your job?
Of the many jobs I had at the house, because, you know, when my older brother went off to college, I had to do all the labor. I hated mowing lawns. To this day, I hate mowing lawns.
Oh, yeah?
I remember that one day, my dad, I'll never forget this because it's one of the fastest I've ever seen my mother move in life. But my dad was out in front of our yard, like doing yard work, like regular, yard work or whatever it is. And I think I was outside in the pipe stem or whatever. So, because I remember seeing this, our next door neighbors, the Walls, very interesting family, but the grandmother of the family was in town. So she comes walking over, and she had to be in her 80s. She sees my dad working on our yard, and she's like, "You're doing a great job." And he's like, "Thank you," as he's pouring whatever it is. And then she's like, "You know what? We used to have some niggers at our property to dig." And when I tell you, my mother broke the sound barrier to grab my dad.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, she said this to your dad?
Said this older white woman, the grandmother of the mother of my next door neighbor, said that to my father, walked onto our yard to say that to him.
Yeah.
And then offer him work. Because she assumed that he had to be hired black labor and couldn't actually be the owner of the house.
Oh, well, that I have publicly admitted doing that exact thing minus a label. When I went to pick up my daughter at my friend's house, he's a listener, Dan McDonald. You might know him because he tweets. Mm-hmm. He's a big fan of yours.
Mm-hmm. And
he was having work done. He's building a deck around his pool.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pulled in, the guys were, I don't know if the guys were there or not, but all the equipment, and they were in the middle of it. And he was talking to a guy. And I went to pick up my daughter, who was babysitting for his kids. And I said to the guy he was talking to, who was brown skinned, I think Hispanic looking to me, I said, "Wow, you're doing great work." And my buddy goes,
"Oh,
This is Ron. He's my next door neighbor." And we're walking in the car. My daughter, probably 15, I guess, goes, "That was straight up racist what you did." And I go like this. I just go, "Yes, textbook.
Absolutely. 120%.
Yeah.
Yes. My mother, I think,
I did add, by the way, and God didn't let me finish. I said for a Hispanic.
Because I've heard you guys don't work. So you just had to add in the racist.
No, I haven't. I don't. It's the precision of the work, whatever it is. That's horrible. So wait, going back to your past, I mean, what happened after that was said? You guys, I mean, were you like, "No, we're the Johnsons, not the."
My father, I remember, my mom tells the story perfectly. She
we got to get her on to tell.
Oh yeah, she breaks the sound barrier, comes downstairs, gets my dad before he curses out and causes this older white woman to have a heart attack on the yard. The Walls actually, I remember, the Walls came out and were apologizing or bringing her back in because she said this loud. She didn't come up with whispers.
The Walls came out and just black bag grandma, threw
her in the back of a van and just left.
Rendition.
Yes. We had some fascinating neighbors. So that family ended up being, so their son, and I can say all this because it's all public record. So their son, Lucas, we went to school together. We were on the student newspaper together. The same student newspaper. Do you remember the Jason Blair story?
He was a writer for the New York Times who got caught plagiarizing. Is that right?
Yeah. We were on the school newspaper together at Centerville High School.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah. So when the Jason Blair story came out, I had a whole bunch of friends who were like, "Jason, are you okay?" I was like, "Dude, it's the other black guy. It was the other black guy at the paper.
Well, you're both named Jason.
And he had glasses. And at the time, I could say there was a nominal resemblance between
All right,
the two.
So basically,
again,
you guys had the same name and dressed and looked a lot alike. But go ahead.
Mind you, I'm like, how did you guys? I'm at freaking UVA. This guy's already at the New York Times. So why are you emailing me on campus to see if I'm okay? But this other guy gets in trouble. But yeah, so we were on a newspaper together. They were that family. If you've ever heard of these stories, like they ended up suing the school system once.
His Jason Blair's family?
No, my neighbors ended up suing the school system once to reveal the results of like a student, what was it called? Like a student election. And now I'm Facebook connected to this guy. He's a crazy right-wing anti-masker.
So the kid that you grew up next door to, he's all grows up like you are, and now he is
a crazy anti-masker and like right-winger, Trump supporting. It's odd.
And you're like, hey, man, remember when we used to hang out at the pipe stem? Were you friends with him when you were little?
No, he was like a year younger than me. And he wrote for the Washington Post. He wrote a really interesting, if I remember correctly, he wrote this really interesting coming out story. He came out several years ago.
As racist?
And then took a hard right turn. Yeah, I know, man. My whole neighborhood is.
He came out as racist. Wait,
he came out as racist.
Maybe he's is it? Let's be honest. Is he racist because you bullied him and he attaches his childhood
trauma to me because I wouldn't let him play duck hunt in the basement with me and the rest of my friends because
of all the games.
Of all the games, we would not let him come over and play Duck Hunt and Adventures of Bayou Billy on my Nintendo.
Oh, man.
I was the bully. I was the cause. I created all the pain that eventually. I mean, I'll tell you this. It's interesting. I was just talking to some friends of mine, and I'm going to be going to Pride Week with them. I'm very excited. I've never gone to a Pride Week before, so I'm going with two friends of mine who are parents. They're going to bring their kid or whatever. And we've had conversations about like people. So we're in Atlanta.
Okay.
In Atlanta. And so, but we've had all these different kinds of conversations, blah, 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 two really, really close friends of mine. And it's always fascinating to me, like the when I've been told these sorts of journeys, because my neighbor, like in high school, he was just, he's like any other kid. I don't know what his personal life was. We weren't like ultra close, but yeah, like, I was more shocked that he came out as this crazy right-wing racist than he came out as LGBTQ. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But dude, you're a Trumper. Like that was way more.
He's probably it must suck that he uses the fact that he was your next door neighbor to prove that he's not racist. No, listen. I grew up next to the Johnson. Jason Johnson? I grew up right next to him. We were really good friends. I have lots of black friends and neighbors.
Oh, dude, I tell you all the time, like it's fascinating to me. It's really fascinating to me how many people I know, like probably claim me as their black best friend from college or high school to rationalize all manner of inappropriate behavior that they're probably engaging in. I
literally did it while we were talking. I was like, I can't. I'm talking to BBF. But
when you were telling that guy, that's some great work for your people. You're a credit to your race. By the way, my friend is Jason Johnson.
Yes.
And he showed a picture of us.
Yes, I use it all the time.
Every single time. It hurts because since I'm ostensibly a public figure, that gives people even more credibility. Right. No, it's not just I had a black friend in high school. This is my black friend. It's
currently.
Like, damn.
You should
my black friend currently.
You should definitely either write a book titled "My Black Friend" or about that from that point of view, or you should, with my help, obviously, because this one's my idea, and I'm going to take 10%. An app. My Black Friend, the app.
Look, there has been lots of creative artwork done about like hiring. There was a website like 10, 12 years ago, like called like Rent a Negro. And it was all about like renting a black friend for parties and social engagements and everything else like that. I think you could make a lot of money doing that.
Strangely, that company was owned by a white guy, which really turns out pretty bad. It wasn't. No, that's one guy I hope that was saying rent it.
It had some bad undertones to it, but a lot of people got paid.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
being the good black friend was very, very helpful. It helped me pay through grad school. It was a whole process.
Well, there's truth about the access that people desire and don't have. And it's certainly true of my audience, some of my audience who live in very homogenous, usually white communities. And this show and others provide them access to a diverse group of people, certainly black folks, but I mean, others as well. And I think that people have that desire. It's a good intention. You're not moving from your all white neighborhood where you raised your family, but you want to understand, you want to literally be friends with. And I think that's a fine intention, right? Am I missing any minds?
I don't know, because it depends on what your motivation is. And I say this all the time about like wanting to get to know whatever it is, different kinds of people. A lot of my friends or people who I meet, it's through work, it's through random events, and I don't count them based on kind of what they are. I am definitely not a colorblind person, right? I am not someone who doesn't have sort of opinions or views or whatever else like that. But the idea of, I want to get to know these kinds of people, so I'm going to make a concerted effort, that's never occurred to me. One, because I'm black, so I've had to always have to know people who are different than me.
Yeah, I think that's why it hasn't occurred to you as much. But,
yeah, like,
but I mean, about, and I mean, I feel like you're not a good example because you're a college professor, and you have exposure to pretty much everybody, LGBTQITA, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, like it's not forced upon you. You chose to be around this group, in this group. And so you don't need that desire, but can you understand how people in any kind of homogenous group might want to know more about, maybe some more Arab people or whatever it is that they might be interested in for any number of reasons. Maybe they just got their ancestry, whatever.com, and they want to get back to their roots, but they don't know any Greeks.
But here's the thing, Pete, even in the career, even if this is the path I've chosen, to sort of paraphrase The Godfather, like that didn't guarantee that I was going to meet different kinds of people. You see this viral video of, I think her name is Ann Wax, this professor at Penn State who just did this crazy racist video. Ellie was tweeting about it, where she was on with Tucker Carlson.
Yes, I watched it this morning, and then I got sick, and I got sick to myself.
So this is what I'm saying. Like, just because you go into a certain profession, even academia, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to interact with people and become any more enlightened. I don't have...
Right.
I don't, like, for example, I don't think I have any, talking to her, like, I don't think I have any friends. Wait, no, I'm sorry. What am I thinking? Of course I do. But this is the thing. Like, I don't think of these attributes. I was like, I don't know if I have any friends who are Muslim. Like, oh no, one of my closest friends is Muslim and her whole family, Naira. Like, but that's not what occurs to me when I think of Naira. I think of Naira as like my friend with the adorable kids, right?
Well, if I think about Naira for like a more than a minute or two, I do probably get to Muslim, but I get to other qualities first.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying, but I also think that that's not what I'm saying. Yes, it doesn't mean that you are going to be a curious person about diversity, but it means you have the opportunity to, if you have those intentions. And what I'm saying is, the larger, more important point I'm trying to make really is people want to have.
He's racist and he wants absolution. That's the point he's trying to make. He's trying to dance around it, and I'm here to help him.
I'm racist and I want what?
You.
What do I want? I want to prove
absolution. He wants
absolution. No, I'm saying you're curious and you don't have access in your community, but you do have it kind of virtually through the radio, podcast, whatever. And you look these people up, and to some extent you feel like you get to know them, especially someone like you who joins me all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, but it's funny because I know people who have probably followed semi-similar paths to myself and don't necessarily have the collection of people who they socialize with.
Sure.
In the same kind of way. And I mean, of all kind of colors. I also think, like, for example, I'm not a parent, right?
Right.
I haven't had to take care of kids. Like, I think that has a huge impact on how you end up meeting people. You know, you get married and you have kids, and a lot of times your social group is going to be determined by other parents with kids your age. And so that leads to a certain level of homogeneity because you're going to be hanging out with the people in your neighborhood or who your kids go to school with, right?
Yeah, and the way that then group selects for itself is horrific.
Yes.
I'm forced to hang out with this guy because our daughters are in the same class when they're young, which means you have to talk with them more. And it's like, this guy is not someone who I want to talk to any longer, much less again tomorrow.
Yes.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that's like, I don't have that experience, right? Like the only experience, the most, maybe I've had situations where it's like, okay, I have to hang out with my girlfriend's friends, right? Which is fine, right? But I've never been in a situation where it's like, oh, okay, this is your set group of people. This is the doctor that you have to go to for your kids. So I think that ends up having a huge impact. And I'll also say this, even within like the workplace, Pete. So you and I met when I went to SIRIUS. We had been on the air together on CNN, but I don't think we met until a certain person introduced the two of us to Sirius XM satellite radio.
I don't know when we met in person.
I have a picture of it.
Oh,
I have a picture of the day we met.
Yeah, I don't even know how tall you are, but I do. But most of the time I've been on the 95% of our conversations and friendship has been on the phone or in these boxes.
Yeah. We met because my manager took me to Sirius XM in like 2015 and was introducing me to a whole bunch of people at Sirius XM in New York. And that's how you and I met. And there's a picture which shows that I'm significantly taller than you in case the audience is curious.
Not hard to be, but I mean, I was. So what is your point about us meeting in person?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like I met you and there was no, like, I don't know what your demographics are, right? And that's the randomness about how you meet people and how you make friends with them and how you interact. Like, we were nominally work colleagues, but I just thought you were kind of funny and we stayed in touch and everything else like that. And I've gotten closer really in the last couple of years. And so, like, that's the other weird thing about when people say, oh, I want to make friends with this kind of person or that person. I'm like, I don't know how you would coordinate that, how you'd orchestrate that, because you never really know who you're going to meet is going to end up being.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair that it's hard to select for a certain group, but I do think that if you're into a certain style of dance, Spanish tango, I don't know, and you're attracted to that culture, I feel like there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's great. I feel like that's fantastic, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think it's hard to make happen, and I think it's more grassroots and organic. At least with my work, it always has been in terms of But I also do obviously try to book people a wide array of diverse type of people as well.
You book rich blacks, you book poor blacks, you book
not true.
It's like, no, I don't book poor black people, Jason. Come on.
Why would I? Come on.
I don't do that kind of charity.
Actually, all my guests do have to send a tax return in, but I didn't think you were going to reveal that.
You know what?
I've been talking to you. You got to go probably.
I have a couple more minutes. I told you I can give you like 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just ask you one quick question about, I feel sad that the word woke is a bad word now. That makes me sad. I loved that word when the blacks came up with it. And I thought it was a great way of, for someone like me, maybe, or other people not having to, I don't know what it was before, if it was a code, but like having to spend a week trying to gain trust and credibility. In this case, someone would be like, that guy's woke or something. And it felt good. You're like, oh, good. I'm curious and open-minded or whatever it meant. And now it's become a very bad word to the point that it's in like the name of legislation, the anti-woke bill. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that word's journey.
It's weird. The etymology of it, the etymology of woke, I think goes back to the 70s. I believe I think it goes back there because it's always about sort of awareness. Are you sleeping through blah, blah, blah. It didn't return to common parlance until probably the last 6 or 7 years. And just like politically correct, it was a term that was adopted. It was a term that was probably occasionally used in academia, that was adopted in bad faith by the far right, and then used to excess in order to demonize behaviors that are all, pretty much infrequent. I mean, you and I were alive in the 90s where it was like, this is a politically correct bathroom. I'm like, who ever referred to a bathroom as politically correct? In fact, I don't know anybody that ever used the term politically correct except to be ironic. But the far right grabbed onto that in the 1990s. So I always tell people this stuff is never new, right? Now, this sort of anti-woke thing, what concerns me, just like it is with anything else, is that all of these words have sort of a mission creep to them, right? Where it's like, well, what it meant initially is not what it means now. There was a great article. I think I might have posted this, or somebody posted this when I did my tweet thread about comedians.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that if you have time.
Yeah. And so it's like, people are like, oh, the woke mob is like ruining stand-up comedy. I'm like, who are you talking about?
Right.
Who are these supposed woke cancel culture people? Cancel culture, I maintain, still doesn't exist. But ask Louis C.K. I don't think that guy got canceled. He just got a freaking Grammy, right? And I'm not making an assessment as to whether he should or should not have gotten a Grammy. I didn't listen to the material that he was given the Grammy for.
Yeah.
But
was that country music star who got caught saying the N-word kind of casually and then sold more albums? And I mean, you name after name that you could mention.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So this idea, like, it just isn't real. And I saw this, but that's the whole thing. Like, the term gets used and then the definition gets expanded to include anything that people on the right don't like, right? So affirmative action suddenly became everything that white conservatives in America didn't like. It wasn't just the idea that affirmative action is actually a set policy in law that Nixon started that we can explain. Affirmative action is anytime a black person gets hired that I don't think is qualified. Anytime a black person does this that I don't like, anytime a woman does this I don't like, suddenly that's affirmative action, right? When it may not be. Anytime somebody doesn't like your crappy joke, right? It's not woke cancel culture. Maybe your jokes suck. Maybe you should just, evolve a bit as a comedian. Maybe, like most comedians who have been fortunate enough to do the work for more than 5 or 10 years, even they'll tell you, yes, my jokes evolve because I grew as a person, right? There was somebody pointed out in the thread, and then you can ask me the question about the thread because I'm interested in your perspective on as well. But somebody pointed out in the thread that even the sort of, I think it was Bill Maher saying, Jerry Seinfeld and Chris Rock, they're examples of people, they won't perform at colleges anymore because, there's too much woke culture. I'm like, look, I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know if a specific statement from Chris Rock.
It's not. It's always been this way with colleges. But go ahead and finish, and I'll tell you what it is.
Yeah, my sort of thing. Somebody responded, and they had a quote from John Mulaney, who I'm a big fan of, really like his work, and he pointed out, he's like, I don't think that that's true. And he's like, and I would say this to their faces if we were interacting. He's like, part of the reason that these guys don't go to colleges is because colleges can't afford them. I mean, what college today could afford Jerry Seinfeld?
That's not actually true, because what a lot of the colleges do is they have a fee. They do have a budget for it, a huge budget in the huge colleges, but they also subsidize ticket sales from the town. And I'll never forget, I was performing at Cornell. And I have several examples of this. I was getting like $1,100. And I would always ask, what does so-and-so get? And they would tell me. They would just tell me. So they could, Jon Stewart was just here. We gave him $100,000. And then he did another show the next night. We gave him another $100,000. And it was, I go, how do you have that money? It was like, we sold tickets to the community. And then, so there's a lot of different ways around it. I also asked what Dane Cook got. And they said something like $98,000. And the kid who had picked me up, the head of student activities, you know about this. You were in that group in college. And I said, is he really $98,000 funnier than me?
Right.
Anyway, that was too long of a rant. The point about what you're saying, though, is really good. Your tweet is much of the conversation over the last 2 weeks about stand-up comedy and mean comics has mostly revealed how little stand-up most people consume nowadays. You say, to say most stand-up is mean or angry is like saying all 90s rap was gangster and violent. Perhaps diversify your comedy diet. And I would just only add to that tweet, add any other adjective you want about comedy or music or anything. It could be angry. It could be observational. It could be speaking truth to power. Who gets to decide what comedy or music is?
Well, and also I think it's very lazy. This is the thing that gets me. I realize this, me and a good friend of mine, Mal, like I actually listen to a lot of stand-up. Like I didn't realize it's like, because you can like name them. Your average person can't really name most stand-ups beyond the 4 or 5, super duper famous ones, right? And I can, because I listen to stand-up comedy online. Prior to the pandemic, I would actually go to comedy shows. And so I think I have a greater breadth of knowledge about what's out there in stand-up. And so this idea, I heard some of these public conversations, that were very critical of Chris Rock, which I didn't think was fair, where people tried to characterize his entire career as like, his entire career is attacking people. I was like, no, it's not. Have you listened to Chris Rock through the years? Have you listened to Tambourine? Have you listened to the things he said? And more importantly, to sort of have this broad brush of this is what we need to do, and comedy is too filled with punching down. I was like, that literally is not 98%, 98,000% of the comedians who are out there. I saw Cristela Alonso, who's like one of my favorite people, right? Cristela Alonso it's storytelling. Kathy Griffin is Kathy Griffin, both in person and on stage, is like the funniest dinner guest you could ever have, right?
Yes.
Like
He's
these
great.
So I'm like, to say that this comedy is punching down or we've reached this course place. I was there when Hassan Minhaj did his show at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I was there when Michelle Wolf did her comedy thing at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
I was there for both those too.
Yeah, that's where I tweeted the picture of
that's
you and
right.
I from.
Right. You shared that picture and mentioned me, and I appreciated it. It made me feel very happy. Go ahead.
Roy Wood, Ali Sadiq. Sadiq is like the best effing storyteller, like ever, right? Yeah. So I say this to say, you can't take what happened at the Oscars and write some, I won't say write some BS concern trolling ad hominem attack on where comedy is in America right now if you don't actually listen to the diversity of stand-up comedy. And I haven't even mentioned any underground people. These are all people who I have seen or I know or I've seen in clubs in Cleveland and blah, 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 blah. And plus, that also has to do with what you define as mean. I saw Paul Mooney live 3 times. Paul Mooney is searing.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul Mooney can atomize you with a look before he even opened his mouth.
Right? I went down a Rickles rabbit hole the other night.
Oh, wow.
And he's one of my favorites of all time. I loved him and Lisa Lampanelli, who I used to open for, his insult comedy. I liked it. They went after every single person for immutable characteristics, by the way. Things they couldn't control about who they were. But I mean, like Rickles would say you're ugly. He would say you personally are an ugly person. He would even say it to like women, but he would say it to guys, like he would hit everybody, and it was mean and hilarious.
And that's the thing. And if you don't like that kind of comedy, that's okay. Sure. Don't go to those shows. Right? You don't have to support that. But to say that that's all comedy, and there's another element to it. Frankly, me and you, again, you kind of know what the comedian is and he or she before you go to the show. But if you sit up front, and I'm not saying this specifically to the Oscars, but for those who are complaining about the meanness, if you sit up front in a comedy show, it's kind of like taking the front seat in like a log flume at the amusement park. You sit up front because you want to get wet, right? If you don't want to get wet, if you don't want to have anybody make fun of your outfit, if you don't want to have the comedian be like, are y'all on a date? Oh, wait, you're on a date. She's not. She's getting free dinner. Like, if you don't want that to happen to you, then don't sit up front. Sit in the middle. Sit in the back.
Yeah. And so what the point of that is you're asking for it, basically, to a certain extent. I mean, yeah. And the best point of view from that would be like before, certainly when I was anonymous and still am for certain gigs, people don't know I'm the comic. and I walk as they're coming in, and you can see them, and you overhear that conversation. I don't want to sit here. I don't want to be, and that's it. And then I just start looking at them and coming up with the jokes right away.
Yes.
And then I bring it, and then everybody gets wet. You're absolutely right.
There you go.
Which is a whole different thing when it comes to COVID. Right. Always great talking to you about
wet and sick. Yes.
Anything and everything. I so appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, man. Anytime.
And there he goes, Dr. Jason Johnson. I forgot to mention this new bumper music is from John Carroll. Patrick Wilson sent another one as well. If you like to do instrumental stuff and put it together, send it over to me. I use all your contributions right here on Stand Up. And speaking of which, regular contributor to the program, you can listen to his podcast, the Muckrake Podcast. You should get his books, American Rule, such an important book. And you should follow him and subscribe to his Substack. He's just a great thinker, smart guy, and I always love his take. Jared Yates Sexton joins me. Always happy to have him. Please go support his work. I love this guy. Let's do it, Jared. Been way too long. Jared Yates Sexton, great to see you. You're doing excellent work. I'm very happy to have you here to talk about it. How are you, though?
I'm okay. I got to tell you, Pete, and this is legitimate. This is actual true stuff. This morning I thought, how is Pete Dominic? How is he doing? I haven't talked to Pete in long enough. And you know what, Pete? It took 20 minutes for you to email me.
That's really interesting that you manifested that. But I bet you it's because Gilbert Gottfried died and you're thinking of comedians dying and you thought of me and you wondered if I had died yet.
You know, I'm not going to go down that route, but I have to assume there's some sort of collective unconscious that's happening there. I reached out to you. You reached out to me, much like a Neil Diamond song, I think is what happened.
I feel like now I just want to do the rest of this interview in Gilbert Gottfried's voice.
Jared! I mean, I probably not appropriate, but I appreciate the thought.
I am very happy that you thought of me, given you and your body of work and all that you do, to have some occupy any space in your head, even for a moment, makes me feel important and that my work is important. How about that?
I love the sincerity that's happening here. That's so nice. Legitimate. This was my unconscious reaching out to yours. I love that this is happening, and now we get to have a conversation about all of the awful things happening in this.
There are two kind of main things I want to speak with you about today. I want to ask you about today. Your latest post for your Substack, I think, is really relevant, and you nail it with your diagnosis here. And I really want to talk about your dispatches from a collapsing state, is Jared's Substack. I already mentioned it. But before that, there's another just a question. You've written all about this in your first book, and we've talked about this a lot. We tend to talk about men and our feelings and all of it. And I now had my second conversation with a man in 1 year who is your typical masculine guy. This guy was a former NYPD police officer. I had just met him. We are at odds publicly about things at school, but we met and had a conversation. And he told me, I don't have any emotions. This is the second of this type of guy who says that. I have a lot of thoughts about what that means and why why a man like that would be so overtly say it. But what do you hear when a guy like that just says, I don't have emotions. I don't get emotional. I don't feel things.
First things first, I think it's important that he's telling you that, because the message is to you, but also to himself. I mean, we've talked about this time and again. The problem with masculinity isn't necessarily like what it is. It's how men have to conform to it, or how they have to project or pretend to be something that they're not. For somebody to stand around and say, I don't have emotions, I'm completely rational. Like, first of all, you got to feel sorry for that person. But second of all, like, you're protesting a little too much. Like, we don't end up at this point with Trumpism and with toxic masculinity and all of these expressions and all of these outward displays of this stuff, if that's actually the truth. It's a performance, and I feel bad for this person.
Interesting response. Very interesting response. And as I think about him, I wish that he would connect with me. I asked him to give me his number and could we talk? And he just kept avoiding. He's like, no, we're talking right now. I was like, you want to argue on Facebook and you want to meet me in person, but like, I can't just have a drink with you. And like, anyway,
but men aren't, I need to point this out. Men aren't good at that. I mean, I if you go into like a bar and you look at a couple of men sitting around, quote unquote, male friendships are just absolute bastions of loneliness because it's a bunch of men sitting around and both of them want to project this idea that they are some sort of like, it's almost like two guys hanging out. They have to pretend like, oh, there's no way we're gay. So obviously we're not going to talk about feelings. And I have to show this guy that I only care about the game that's on TV. I don't need to talk about how he feels or how I feel. And in a way, we end up becoming our own jailers in that regard. It's really sad.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's often you see two guys talking. They're talking about everything but anything. So they're talking about maybe the world and probably about sports, but I always kind of joked about I couldn't even get guys to talk about their kids, just about what their kids were doing. Not all, I mean, certainly a lot of guys I can, but these kind of men that I'm kind of classifying. So speaking of, the concern of someone might think I'm gay, that's the other thing. And it can kind of tie into your latest, and you've been talking about this. But generally, I've been asking guests this week. What's happening? I thought we fought and won this battle on at least gay marriage, gay equity. Now, I realize they've got a new Supreme Court makeup, and maybe that's getting them fired up that they could reverse something that maybe they thought they had to accept. But other than that, I'm still shocked by it. And tell me why. How did I get so naive, I guess?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with what we want the world to be like and how we want life to move. I mean, one of the most famous sort of sayings over the last few years is that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice.
Yeah, Obama always used that. Yeah.
There is this story that as long as time goes on, things are going to get better. And in fact, that's sort of a side effect of the capitalistic system that we live within, which is, you know what, a lot of bad things happen and a lot of people are oppressed and there's a lot of suffering. But I promise you, the wealthy, the powerful, the smart, they're leading us somewhere good. We need to put our faith in that. By the way, maybe Elon Musk deserves more money so he can get us to space. Why would you stand in the guy's way when he's trying to save the human species? That entire idea of progress, unfortunately, is a fiction. Because what history tells us over and over again is there have been these moments where like human rights have gone up, human liberty has gone up, but then there's always sort of a backlash against it and people start pulling you backwards. And so what we've noticed in the past few decades is as we're being told that things are getting better, these authoritarian movements, these reactionaries, these regressive personalities and movements are starting to gain power and purchase. And to be honest, they're doing the exact same thing that the fascists did in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Benito Mussolini, as he came on the scene, he told people, you think that history only goes in one way. You're wrong. It can go this way. We can reclaim what progress gave us. And you're exactly right. I felt the same way when gay marriage was legalized. I was like, finally, we can get past this. But that doesn't necessarily comport with how these people feel about what culture should feel like. For a lot of people, this felt like an apocalyptic moment that necessitated authoritarian measures, and that's what we're seeing now.
The marriage equity? That felt like...
So, have you ever heard of this guy named Rod Dreher?
Yeah. Yes, I have, for sure. I've seen... Go ahead.
So Rod Dreher is this conservative guy who, Pete, I don't know how else to put this, but he seems to have a lot of conflicting feelings about progress and gay rights and things like that. And, this is the kind of guy who went over to Hungary for a year and met with Viktor Orban and basically started touting Hungary as sort of the answer to the GOP's cultural problems. And people like Dreher, they said whenever gay marriage happened, they said, that's it. Christianity is lost. There's no ability whatsoever for conservatives to function in this country as it works. We have to look for alternatives. So they've given up on representative government. They've given up on liberal institutions. And they're saying now, looking at Hungary and also looking at Putin's Russia, they say we can't trust liberal democracy. We have to reinstate these past hierarchical concerns, which, by the way, always go the way of white evangelical men. And so what they're actually trying to do is they're trying to reverse time again, leaving the rest of us who thought that we were beyond this to kind of look around and say, what in the hell is going on here?
Yeah, your piece that you've published most recently, Culture War, Corporate Dominance, and the Authoritarian Movement. You write the clash between right-wing reactionaries and Disney showcases where power lies and what the future might look like. And it really caught me here. I don't want to brag, and I don't know if you know this, but as an 18-year-old man boy, I did my college internship in Orlando, Florida during the summer of 1994, working at Epcot Center. I was on the Disney college program. It was 1994, and they had a day of gay pride. And I remember someone joking, don't wear red to the park today unless you want everybody to think that you're gay. And so I wore red head to toe. No, the point I'm bringing this up is in 1994, this company, say what you will about them, and there's a lot to say, was forward-thinking, progressive, and supportive of lesbian and gay employees and guests. I remember then thinking how impressed that was and how ahead of their time they were. And so the question, kind of becomes, and you write about this in your piece, can capitalism save us?
I mean,
on the culture war issues, women's reproductive rights, gay rights, all this.
And, you want to go back to let's go back to when gay marriage got legalized. One of the things that happened in the middle of this, and you might remember Mike Pence when he was governor of Indiana, him and the Republicans in Indiana started pushing all of this like defense of religion acts, right? Which would basically lead to systemic discrimination of LGBTQ people. And what happened? The corporations in Indiana said, no, you can't do that because we're going to lose out on employees. We're going to lose out on sponsorships, all of this stuff. This moment that we're living in, we're supposed to lobby corporations as an enacting of this idea of consumer sovereignty, which is why whenever this stuff happens, we say, hey, Disney, you're in Florida. Are you going to stand up in this Don't Say Gay bill in terms of what DeSantis and the Republicans are doing down there? The entire reason is because the democratic process in terms of representative government has been undermined completely. Because, it's not a great thing if you have democratic movements which are challenging the market and challenging this progressive sort of market capitalism that we're seeing. So instead, we're supposed to ask corporations to do it for us. And as a result, we are voting with our dollars, with our patronage, with our fandom to try and get these corporations to attack these people and sort of fight the battles that Democrats aren't necessarily willing to battle or aren't capable of battling. The problem here, though, is that corporations are not inherently ideological. The entire purpose of a corporation is first and foremost to profit. And that's for the shareholders. That's for the corporation itself. And what we're seeing in a lot of cases right now, and take someone like a Facebook, everyone's like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg is like inherently authoritarian. Well, no, part of the reason Facebook does what it does is because it makes its money from right-wing conspiracy theories. Like if they were making it from leftist doctrine, I mean, he would be pictured as Che Guevara everywhere. And that's the entire thing is they sort of ride these waves of what people want, but never really landing on these ideological concrete moments. And in this case, we cannot expect corporations to save us. In the exact same way you and I talked about Ukraine and Russia, these people are not necessarily doing things because they believe in them. They're doing them because of PR purposes or because they have a market demographic that they need to capture.
So well said, but what's the analysis of the outlook? Because the way I see it, if you are Nike or Disney or any company, digital company, and you alienate most of the black people or most of the women or most of the gay people, and by the way, and all those who support them, then you stand to lose a lot. And we could talk about examples where that's happened. But so are there enough people that are, so concerned and so anti-gay or so, I don't know what you want to call them, because they're, I guess, conservative and concerned that hurts the bottom line of a international, global company? Because, and then finally, the component is even if I hate Disney, I'm still going. Yep. It's like me. Like I support companies and shop and consume from companies that I despise. I still do it sometimes. I try to spend my money responsibly, but I still use Amazon. So what is the outlook? What is the future analysis of what happens given the renewal of these old culture war divides?
Well, I'll go ahead and say there's a problem always when we talk about this stuff, and it always comes down to the consumer. And one of the things I like to point out, IKEA had this ad campaign about a year ago. I don't know if you remember this, but it was like there was an asteroid of products that were coming towards the Earth. But if you bought renewable and sustainable products, the asteroid started to dissipate, right? And the entire message behind that was, hey, global climate change is real. So you should probably buy things that as a consumer, and by the way, I hate to say this, but this is part of like the recycling idea when we're buying recyclable products and stuff like that. Unfortunately, climate change is not something that Pete Dominick or Jared Yates Sexton can fix, right? We're just sort of cogs in a larger machine. So we're talking about consumers right now when, in fact, we need to be talking about reining in corporations and the wealthy in general through government. And that's what should be taking place here. But unfortunately, because of neoliberalism and Reaganism and you name it, and Thatcherism, these corporations have grown larger than nation states. They are no longer bound by the United States of America. They're transnational bodies. Right. And you're exactly right. Nike or a Disney will, quote unquote, say the right thing or do the right thing because they're worried about some sort of consumer backlash. And that's in the moment, though. But look what happens whenever these companies go over to authoritarian nations. I mean, like Apple is a wonderful example of this. Apple will go in to China or it'll go into Russia and it'll say, what do you need from us authoritarians? We'll make that product. That's totally fine. We'll go ahead and make sure that your people aren't able to get the information or able to communicate. So the question is, will the balance of the scales, will it switch here? And what will corporations do? Right now, they're making a determination, and this is something we can all tell. They know that the ascendant progressive consumer is where the money is. Meanwhile, you have, the Daily Wire just dumped like $100 million into children's entertainment. Yeah, the
conservative Ben Shapiro's outfit, yeah.
Right. So conservatives are starting to build up their own consumer world. Right. It's a balkanization is a lot of what's happening.
By the way, okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say very quickly, right now, corporate markets are saying that the progressive idea of the world is where they need to be because that's where the discretionary income is. But the question is, will political circumstances change where that sort of estimate doesn't hold place anymore?
Yeah, what do you think? I don't think they do. I for example, I don't think Ben Shapiro's, and I have no idea about this, but I don't think that their venture into entertainment succeeds. I think it's going to be shit. I think it's going to be poorly done. I think the writers are going to suck. I think they're going to get terribly untalented people. And I think most importantly, young people just aren't going to buy it. But maybe I'm wrong.
Listen, it's going to be absolute shit. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terribly done. But I do have to tell you that there is a marketing demographic of people right now who are like, I will never let my kid watch Disney again. They're a bunch of groomers, whatever. These conspiracy theories run deep.
Yeah.
You also need to remember that, we were both alive for another era where this took place, the 1980s. And as neoliberalism and Reaganism really took over, culture changed. It started to become a culture of conspicuous consumption, the worship of wealth. The evangelical right held sway over a lot of popular culture. These things can shift. They can change. And the problem here is when you look at places like Hungary or, again, Putinist Russia, when those authoritarians or authoritarian movements capture hold of political power, particularly the purse strings of government and the legislative process, they can put pressure on these corporations, they can put pressure on these producers, and they can create a conservative reactionary culture.
I just, but I really am wondering, how it plays out in this country. For example, Oklahoma, in effect, banned abortions yesterday. And so what happens there in Oklahoma? Do they start to see what that means and that women are dying? Do they care? Are there that many women that want an abortion? Obviously there are, but that it makes a difference somehow? Do they elect new legislators that will make at least an exception for rape and abortion, Jared? It's hard to believe that they pass a law that includes, it's one thing on abortion, but rape and incest, I used to think was a bridge too far, but not anymore.
No, it's not. And the frightening part here is that balkanization that I was talking about, the Democratic and the Republican parties basically decided, you know what, we're going to take 45% of the country, you're going to take 45% of the country, and all elections will be decided by that 10% in the middle. And of course, we have a lot of red states that are not necessarily well populated. They've been gerrymandered all to hell. And part of the balkanization of culture is now you have so-called blue America looking at red America and saying, my God, what a hellhole. Who would ever want to live over there? But the Republicans have been very smart and very tactical in all of this. They've taken over these states, particularly not just like, red rocked Republican states, but also some of these leaning purple states. Georgia, where I live, is an example of this. They know that they could lose this state unless they take, anti-democratic action. And so one of the things that we're seeing is life is going to be very different in red states versus blue states. And I can tell you, I've lived in Georgia now for 10 years. I've seen a marked change. It really, really went from like, maybe your neighbor and you don't agree on politics or whatever, to politics constantly being a battlefield, culture constantly being a battlefield. You can barely go out to dinner right now without hearing conspiracy theories and seeing small political confrontations that are taking place everywhere. So we're looking at a potential where these different states are going to basically have different realities going forward.
Tell me about your recent episode of your podcast where you had an interview with Diana Butler Bass, who is an author and writes about religion and spirituality and history and politics, because there is a veritable cottage industry now of experts who are doing, I think, a great job. I would include you in them at examining this part of America and Americans, the evangelical movement, the white evangelical movement specifically, and how much power they've sought and gained. Tell me about what you learned from her.
Well, Diana and me, we sort of come from the same sort of background in terms of religion. Like, as everybody else in America in 2016 was looking around, they're like, what do you mean Christians are supporting Donald Trump? How could something like that ever take place?
Right.
Like, a lot of people, particularly in blue states, particularly in the coast, they kind of always sort of looked at religion sort of almost as a social club where you met and, you had a potluck dinner where you ate some tasteless macaroni and cheese. But that's not what this has been. It's been a political and cultural force for a long, long time. I mean, I grew up in a church where the New World Order conspiracy theory was part of what we learned every Sunday. I mean, white supremacist paranoia. And so what Diana and I talked about and what we've been talking about for a while is that these things are inherent in the systems of control. It controls culture. It controls politics. All these conspiracy theories and apocalyptic thinking bleeds into the ideology that makes it possible for these anti-democratic actions and this violence that we're talking about to be carried out. So it's sort of the background framework that allows people to go there. And this is something that, unfortunately, a lot of Americans simply weren't paying attention to because it wasn't part of their backgrounds or their lives.
It's one thing to not be paying attention to it or to think something about it that's not, fully accurate, that it was just a social club. But what they have become now is the most powerful force in America. And the reason why that's so obviously troubling is that it's very dangerous. But also, I think it's still a fairly small minority of Americans who kind of believe in this stuff, although I'm concerned it might be changing, but like more like a 20% or less of people who kind of really subscribe to this hardcore apocalyptic which with an overlay now of QAnon and Democrats are pedophiles and groomers. Like, I don't know how, but it still seems to be a minority of Americans that buy into it. And I'm not sure if that ideology is growing or waning. What do you think?
Oh, it's both. Well, no, it really truly is, because a weird thing is happening. People like myself who left the church and left evangelicalism because we looked around and we're like, oh my God, this is horrific, right? Like, the corruption's terrible. You start to read the writing on the wall and you're like, I don't want to be a part of this. So in one way, the evangelical, particularly the white evangelical community, is shrinking in terms of the numbers that they have. People are leaving these churches. And part of the reason is because it's so obvious what the corruption is. But there's a weird thing that's happened in the past couple of years, Pete, that I don't think a lot of people are keeping tabs on, which is people that I would call cultural evangelicals. So like people who say, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, I just don't go to church on Sundays, right? It's something that they say like informs their world. Those people are starting to go to these churches. They're starting to go to patriot churches because their culture and their politics is becoming even more inextricable from the church. So what you're actually seeing are people who are leaving because they're disturbed by it, but other people are coming in because they're sort of seduced by it. And they're looking for reasons why their own socioeconomic circumstances are getting worse and worse and why they feel more powerless every day. So you're actually watching this movement just hemorrhage people, which, by the way, sets off their apocalyptic ideas, right? All of a sudden, Satan's coming after them. They're losing their power. We're going down the wrong path. But then you're getting more ardent people who are coming in because their political and socioeconomic standards are starting to really go in the way of this. So we're going to see more and more extremism within the white evangelical church.
So we're seeing more extremism, but their numbers are... They're losing numbers. I
would have to say it's probably a negative sum at this point, but you're seeing like strange maneuvers, particularly in communities that have been hit hard by deindustrialization. I mean, you're seeing a lot of people who are starting to really throw in with these patriot churches.
Do you think that right now, if the leadership in the Republican Party at both the state, which is different than the national level, say Kevin McCarthy, leader of the House, or the highest ranking Republican, maybe a governor in a state, much less the Speaker of the House or something like that. If asked, and they should be asked in an interview, do you think Democrats are pedophiles or somehow grooming or pedophile allies of, or whatever the right question there is? Do you think that's a question that should be being asked? And do you think that what kind of answer do you think that leaders in the Republican Party, which is maybe different than the grassroots or the quote base, would say to such a thing? Because I am seeing this catch on in a week, like a week. The word groomer, people learned it 2 weeks ago, and or maybe a little longer. And it was used last night at the BOE meeting by the person who spoke before me in my community. Groomer.
Yeah, and that
by the way, I have to do a live read for groomers coming up. So.
Well, I got to tell you, this has run completely through the GOP establishment. And one of the things that we make the mistake of doing is pretending like the GOP is just one monolithic group. Right. There are so many groups within it right now. When Donald Trump was asked about QAnon, like he sort of had an understanding that they were a group, but he also sort of fumbled through and he's like, is this a bad thing? Is this bad?
He said, I remember, he's like, they're against child traffickers. I mean, I don't know everything, but I know they're against pedophiles, and I think that's good. I think they're good that's
right. And here's the thing: McCarthy would stumble through this thing, probably step on a rake, and then leave and get in a fight with Madison Cawthorn before the hour was up. But I do have to tell you that this grooming thing, it's not a grassroots rhetorical appeal. This was created, and this is the thing that nobody wants to talk about. The GOP is just a PR front for a bunch of think tanks and wealthy donors. And those think tanks, particularly people like Christopher Rufo, have completely settled on this is the rhetoric that is going to win stuff because it activates QAnon principles. That's all this is it's literally just weaponizing the stuff that was put in place by QAnon. So you have a lot of Republicans who would absolutely be like, yes, we are taking on a pedophile cabal. There are others who would try and maneuver their way through it. But the people who say that's what's happening, that's the ascendant part of the Republican Party. I mean, that's where the Republican Party is going at this point. Those other people who are afraid to talk about it or they think that norms would be violated, those people are on their way out.
It's a weird thing that happened. I think you're right, with the Supreme Court justice hearings, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings, when they basically were saying that she's soft on pedophiles. Soft on crime has always been a thing, but specifically now, soft on pedophiles and terrorists, but soft on pedophiles. And then it kind of slowly morphed into she's a pedophile. And then it now is any of us who support her or Democrats or are Democrats are also either somehow lenient on sexual assault against children, molestation, whatever you want to say, collecting pictures and videos, anything, or at least or are ourselves somehow. Remember last year, I keep forgetting this, I got called a pedophile for like a week by saying don't sexualize little girls when you watch them.
Yep. Which, by the way, that's all this country wants to do. It just wants to sexualize girls left and right. But that's within the patriarchal sort of heteronormative idea. What we're watching right now, and I just want to make a couple of quick points. One, going back to the 1980s culture that was built on the satanic panic that the evangelical right perpetuated and used for their own political purposes. If you send your kids to pre-K, you send your kids to a daycare, they're going to get molested. They're going to get snatched on the streets. There's an evil satanic movement that's out there. And as a result, give us all the power. We have to fight it. But on top of that, this is also what's being used in Hungary with Viktor Orban. It's being used in Putinist Russia. The idea is if you go ahead and allow LGBTQ people to have rights, they're coming for your children. There is a base for that in America. Jerry Falwell pushed that. Pat Robertson pushed that. All of that idea is now being activated and put into place by all of these people to try and create an illiberal regime that looks a lot like Orbanist Hungary or Putinist Russia. I mean, that's literally the playbook that they're rolling out right now.
Okay, well, I got to let you go, but do you want to leave us on a message of hope or a solution, anything at all?
Yeah, they're doing this because they're terrified. Their numbers are absolutely dwindling. I mean, the only reason the Republican Party has any power whatsoever is because there's a lot of states that have been hollowed out and they've been able to completely control them. The Democratic Party hasn't given them any sort of a contest in those states. Then on top of it, the Electoral College and the Senate are there to help minoritarian movements. I mean, they are losing power. They are losing numbers. And on top of that, I got to tell you that the labor movements that we're watching right now gain speed and momentum. I think that they're in trouble. And this is a last-ditch effort. This is a pull in case of emergency type situation. But that doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. It just means that we are reaching a sort of crossroads right now.
Great points, all of them. Thank you very, very much for your time. It's so great to catch up with you, pal. And I really appreciate always the off-air conversations we have as well.
All right, buddy. Good seeing you.
All right, there he goes, Jared Yates Sexton. How about it, everybody? Did you like it? Do you like his work? JaredYatesSexton.substack.com. Go subscribe there. Follow him on Twitter, where he is always on fire at JY Sexton. And of course, listen to the Muckrake podcast. Support him on Patreon. Let him know you heard him here at JY Sexton, everybody. All right. Thank you again to Dr. Jason Johnson. Tweet him as well. Thanks to John Carroll for the bumper music and the theme song, of course. As always, the great Pete Coe for the opening and the jingle. All of you for your subscriptions. Hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. That's tonight at 8 p.m. Join us. If you are not already a subscriber, go to standupwithpete.com and sign up now. You'll get an email each and every day with the vitamin N pictures. Send me your vitamin N, folks. Got some good ones lately. Send that over as well. All your nature photos, not including any man-made objects. That's the only rule. John Carroll taking us out. See you tonight, folks.
All of us know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. Let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.